Kia ora. Welcome to Campfire Stories. I'm Rose from Christchurch City Libraries and I'm reading Agatha Christie's The Moving Finger. Do you think you might have an idea of who the killer is? I wonder if we'll find any more clues in this episode. Jerry went and found Megan before leaving the house. She was in the garden and seemed almost back to her usual self. She greeted me quite cheerfully. I suggested that she should come back to us again for a while, but after a momentary hesitation she shook her head. "It's nice of you, but I think I'll stay here. After it all, it is, well, I suppose it is my home, and I dare say I can help with the boys a bit." "Well," I said, "it's as you like." "Then I think I'll stay. I could... "Yes," I prompted. If anything awful happened, I could ring you up, couldn't I, and you'd come?" I was touched. "Of course. But what awful thing do you think might happen?" "Oh, I don't know." She looked vague. "Things seem rather like that just now, don't they?" "For God's sake," I said, "don't go nosing out any more bodies. It's not good for you." She gave me a brief flash of a smile. "No, it isn't. It made me feel awfully sick." I didn't much like leaving her there, but after all, as she said, it was her home, and I fancied that now Elsie Holland would feel more responsible for her. Nash and I went up together to Little Furze. Whilst I gave Joanna an account of the morning's doings, Nash tackled Partridge. He rejoined us, looking discouraged. "Not much help there. According to this woman, the girl only said she was worried about something and didn't know what to do, and that she'd like Mrs. Partridge's advice." "Did Partridge mention the fact to anyone?" asked Joanna. Nash nodded, looking grim. "Yes, she told Mrs. Emery, your daily woman, on the lines, as far as I can gather, that there were some young women who were willing to take advice from their elders and didn't think they could settle everything for themselves offhand. Agnes mightn't be very bright, but she was a nice, respectable girl and knew her manners." "Partridge preening herself, in fact," murmured Joanna. "And Mrs. Emery could have passed it round the town?" "That's right, Miss Burton." "There's one thing that rather surprises me," I said. "Why were my sister and I included among the recipients of the anonymous letters? We were strangers down here. Nobody could have had a grudge against us." "You're failing to allow for the mentality of a poison pen. All is grist that comes to their mill. Their grudge, you might say, is against humanity." "I suppose," said Joanna thoughtfully, "that this is what Mrs. Dane Calthrop meant." Nash looked at her inquiringly, but she did not enlighten him. The superintendent said, "I don't know if you happened to look closely at the envelope of the letter you got, Miss Burton. If so, you may have noticed that it was actually addressed to Miss Barton, and the A altered to a U afterwards." That remark, properly interpreted, ought to have given us a clue to the whole business. As it was, none of us saw any significance in it. Nash went off, and I was left with Joanna. She actually said, "You don't think that letter can really have been meant for Miss Emily, do you?" "It would hardly have begun 'You painted trollop,'" I pointed out, and Joanna agreed. Then she suggested that I should go down to the town. "You ought to hear what everyone is saying. It will be the topic this morning." I suggested that she should come too, but rather to my surprise, Joanna refused. She said she was going to mess about in the garden. I paused in the doorway and said, lowering my voice, "I suppose Partridge is all right." "Partridge?" The amazement in Joanna's voice made me feel ashamed of my idea. I said apologetically, "I just wondered. She's rather queer in some ways, a grim spinster, the sort of person who might have religious mania." "This isn't religious mania, or so you told me Graves said." "Well, sex mania. They're very closely tied up together, I understand. She's repressed and respectable and has been shut up here with a lot of elderly women for years." "What put the idea into your head?" I said slowly, "Well, we've only her word for it, haven't we, as to what the girl Agnes said to her. Suppose Agnes asked Partridge to tell her why Partridge came and left a note that day, and Partridge said she'd call round that afternoon and explain." "And then camouflaged it by coming to us and asking if the girl could come here?" "Yes." "But Partridge never went out that afternoon." "We don't know that. We were out ourselves, remember." Yes, that's true. It's possible, I suppose. Joanna turned it over in her mind. But I don't think so all the same. I don't think Partridge has the mentality to cover her tracks over the letters, to wipe off fingerprints and all that. It isn't only cunning you want, it's knowledge. I don't think she's got that. I suppose, Joanna hesitated, then said slowly, they are sure it's a woman, aren't they? You don't think it's a man? I exclaimed incredulously. Not an ordinary man, but a certain kind of man. I'm thinking really of Mr. Pye. So Pye is your selection? Don't you feel yourself that he's a possibility? He's the sort of person who might be lonely and unhappy and spiteful. Everyone you see rather laughs at him. Can't you see him secretly hating all the normal happy people and taking a perverse artistic pleasure in what he was doing? Graves said a middle-aged spinster. Mr. Pye said Joanna is a middle-aged spinster. A misfit, I said slowly. Very much so. He's rich, but money doesn't help, and I do feel he might be unbalanced. He is really rather a frightening little man. He got a letter himself, remember? We don't know that, Joanna pointed out. We only thought so, and anyway, he might have been putting on an act. For our benefit? Yes, he's clever enough to think of that and not to overdo it. He must be a first-class actor. But of course, Jerry, whoever is doing this must be a first-class actor. That's partly where the pleasure comes in. For God's sake, Joanna, don't speak so understandingly. You make me feel that you understand the mentality. I think I do. I can just get into the mood. If I weren't Joanna Burton, if I weren't young and reasonably attractive and able to have a good time, if I were, how shall I put it, behind bars, watching other people enjoy life, would a black evil tide rise in me, making me want to hurt, to torture, even to destroy? Joanna! I took her by the shoulders and shook her. She gave a little sigh and shiver and smiled at me. I frightened you, didn't I, Jerry? But I have a feeling that that's the right way to solve this problem. You've got to be the person, knowing how they feel and what makes them act, and then perhaps you'll know what they're going to do next. Oh, hell, I said, and I came down here to be a vegetable and get interested in all the dear little local scandals. Dear little local scandals. Libel, vilification, obscene language and murder. Joanna was quite right. The High Street was full of interested groups. I was determined to get everyone's reactions in turn. I met Griffith first. He looked terribly ill and tired, so much so that I wondered. Murder is not certainly all in the day's work to a doctor, but his profession does equip him to face most things, including suffering, the ugly side of human nature, and the fact of death. You look all in, I said. Do I? He was vague. Oh, I've had some worrying cases lately. Including our lunatic at large? That's certainly. He looked away from me across the street. I saw a fine nerve twitching in his eyelid. You've no suspicions as to who? No, I wish to God I had. He asked abruptly after Joanna and said hesitatingly that he had some photographs she'd wanted to see. I offered to take them to her. Oh, it doesn't matter. I shall be passing that way actually later in the morning. I began to be afraid that Griffith had got it badly. Curse Joanna. Griffith was too good a man to be dangled as a scalp. I let him go, for I saw his sister coming, and I wanted for once to talk to her. Amy Griffith began, as it were, in the middle of a conversation. Absolutely shocking, she boomed. I hear you were there quite early. There was a question in her words, and her eyes glinted as she stressed the word early. I wasn't going to tell her that Megan had rung me up. I said instead, You see, I was a bit uneasy last night. The girl was due to tea at our house and didn't turn up. And so you feared the worst. Damn smart of you. Yes, I said, I'm quite the human bloodhound. It's the first murder we've ever had in Lymstock. Excitement is terrific. Hope the police can handle it all right. I shouldn't worry, I said. They're an efficient body of men. Can't even remember what the girl looked like, although I suppose she's opened the door to me dozens of times. Quiet, insignificant little thing. Knocked on the head and then stabbed through the back of the neck, so Owen tells me. Looks like a boyfriend to me. What do you think? That's your solution? Seems the most likely one. Had a quarrel, I expect. They're very inbred round here. Bad heredity, a lot of them. She paused and then went on. I hear Megan Hunter found the body. Must have given her a bit of a shock. I said shortly, Did. Not too good for her, I should imagine. In my opinion, she's not too strong in the head, and a thing like this might send her completely off her onion. I took a sudden resolution. I had to know something. Tell me, Miss Griffith, was it you who persuaded Megan to return home yesterday? Well, I wouldn't say exactly persuaded. I stuck to my guns. But you did say something to her? Amy Griffith planted her feet firmly and stared me in the eyes. She was just slightly on the defensive. She said, It's no good that young woman shirking her responsibilities. She's young and she doesn't know how tongues wag, so I felt it my duty to give her a hint. Tongues? I broke off because I was too angry to go on. Amy Griffith continued with that maddeningly complacent confidence in herself which was her chief characteristic. Oh, I dare say you don't hear all the gossip that goes round. I do. I know what people are saying. Mind you, I don't for a minute think there's anything in it, not for a minute. But you know what people are. If they can say something ill-natured, they do. And it's rather hard lines on the girl when she's got her living to earn. Her living to earn? I said, puzzled. Amy went on. It's a difficult position for her naturally, and I think she did the right thing. I mean, she couldn't go off at a moment's notice and leave the children with no one looking after them. She's been splendid, absolutely splendid. I say so to everybody, but there it is, and it's an invidious position, and people will talk. Who are you talking about? I asked. Elsie Holland, of course, said Amy Griffith impatiently. In my opinion, she's a thoroughly nice girl, and has only been doing her duty. And what are people saying? Amy Griffith laughed. It was, I thought, rather an unpleasant laugh. They're saying that she's already considering the possibility of becoming Mrs. Symington No. 2. That's all she's out to console the widower and make herself indispensable. But good God, I said, shocked. Mrs. Symington's only been dead a week. Amy Griffith shrugged her shoulders. Of course, it's absurd, but you know what people are. The Holland girl is young and she's good-looking. That's enough. And mind you, being a nursery governess isn't much of a prospect for a girl. I wouldn't blame her if she wanted a settled home and husband and was playing her cards accordingly. Of course, she went on, poor Dick Symington hasn't the least idea of all this. He's still completely knocked out by Mona Symington's death. But you know what men are. If the girl is always there, making him comfortable, looking after him, being obviously devoted to the children, well, he gets to be dependent on her. I said quietly, So you do think that Elsie Holland is a designing hussy? Amy Griffith flushed. Not at all. I'm sorry for the girl, with people saying nasty things. That's why I more or less told Megan that she ought to go home. It looks better than having Dick Symington and the girl alone in the house. I began to understand things. Amy Griffith gave her jolly laugh. You're shocked, Mr. Burton, at hearing what our gossiping little town thinks. I can tell you this, they always think the worst. She laughed and nodded and strode away. I came upon Mr. Pye by the church. He was talking to Emily Barton, who looked pink and excited. Mr. Pye greeted me with every evidence of delight. Ah, Burton, good morning, good morning. How is your charming sister? I told him that Joanna was well. But not joining our village parliament? We're all agog over the news. Murder! Real Sunday newspaper murder in our midst. Not the most interesting of crimes, I fear. Somewhat sordid. The brutal murder of a little serving maid. No finer points about the crime, but still undeniably news. Miss Barton said tremulously, It is shocking, quite shocking. Mr. Pye turned to her. But you enjoy it, dear lady, you enjoy it. Confess it now. You disapprove, you deplore, but there is the thrill. I insist there is the thrill. Oh, such a nice girl, said Emily Barton. She came to me from St. Clotilde's home. Quite a raw girl, but most teachable. She turned into such a nice little maid. Partridge was very pleased with her. I said quickly, She was coming to tea with Partridge yesterday afternoon. I turned to Pye. I expect Amy Griffith told you. My tone was quite casual. Pye responded apparently quite unsuspiciously. She did mention it, yes. She said I remember that it was something quite new for servants to ring up on their employers' telephones. Partridge would never dream of doing such a thing, said Miss Emily, and I am really surprised at Agnes doing so. You are behind the times, dear lady, said Mr. Pye. My two terrors used the telephone constantly and smoked all over the house until I objected. But one daren't say too much. Prescott is a divine cook, though temperamental, and Mrs. Prescott is an admirable house parlour-maid. Yes, indeed, we all think you're very lucky. I intervened, since I did not want the conversation to become purely domestic. The news of the murder has got round very quickly, I said. Of course, said Mr. Pye. The butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, enter rumour, painted full of tongues. Lymstock, alas, is going to the dogs. Anonymous letters, murders, any amount of criminal tendencies. Emily Barton said nervously, They don't think, there's no idea that the two are connected? Mr. Pye pounced on the idea. An interesting speculation. The girl knew something, therefore she was murdered. Yes, most promising. How clever of you to think of it. Oh, I can't bear it. Emily Barton spoke abruptly and turned away, walking very fast. Pye looked after her. His cherubic face was pursed up quizzically. He turned back to me and shook his head gently. A sensitive soul. A charming creature, don't you think? Absolutely a period piece. She's not, you know, of her own generation. She's of the generation before that. The mother must have been a woman of very strong character. She kept the family ticking at about 1870, I should say. The whole family preserved under a glass case. I do like to come across that sort of thing. I did not want to talk about period pieces. What do you really think about all this business? I asked. Meaning by that? Anonymous letters, murder. Our local crime wave? What do you? I asked you first, I said pleasantly. Mr. Pye said gently, I am a student, you know, of abnormalities. They interest me. Such apparently unlikely people do the most fantastic things. Take the case of Lizzie Borden. There's not really a reasonable explanation of that. In this case, my advice to the police would be, study character. Leave your fingerprints and your measuring of handwriting and your microscopes. Notice instead what people do with their hands, and their little tricks of manner, and the way they eat their food, and if they laugh sometimes for no apparent reason. I raised my eyebrows. Mad? I said. Quite mad, said Mr. Pye, and added, but you'd never know it. Who? His eyes met mine. He smiled. No, Burton, that would be slander. We can't add slander to all the rest of it. He fairly skipped off down the street. I wonder who Mr. Pye thinks is the murderer. Lots and lots of options, isn't there? Thanks for joining me. We'll see you next time.